Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to the first module for the CCI Clearance Preparedness Program. The next module will be on March 12th from 1 to 2 p.m. Guide to the clearance paperwork process. You'll receive a calendar hold that invites you the month before each module, along with reminders. Please sign into the Zoom modules with your first and last name. There might be someone else with the same name as you, and we want to ensure that you receive attendance credit. Individuals who did not register and received links from friends will also not receive a badge because I don't have their emails and they did not complete the registration process. Having said that, we take attendance every single time. Zoom webinar documents the date and duration of your stay on the module. You do not need to email me after the module to tell me you attended. If you are having Zoom issues, I sadly cannot help you. Please contact your institution's IT department. If you have a question regarding your attendance, please do not hesitate to contact me. Very happy to help you. Lastly, students will only receive a digital badge certificate if they complete 8, 9, or all 10 modules. I will now turn this over to Dr. Eric Berger to get started on today's module.
Thank you so much, Kendall, and thank you all for taking time out of your day to learn more about clearance readiness. There are a number of modules that we will go over the next couple of months. And then we like to bring in people from industry and people from government to talk about various aspects of what cleared jobs are like, the clearance process, people's experience in the intelligence and defense communities, and as well the kinds of jobs. And you might learn that there are jobs that are more than just in the intelligence communities and the defense area that require a clearance. So first of all, I'm hoping that most of you here already have in mind what you will get from the program. As Kendall mentioned, you'll get a cool digital certificate if you attend. You must be present to win. We track you. But more important than to the content, knowledge of what you can and cannot do with a clearance. We'll go over the details on the clearance process, including some common misperceptions, but also, how should we say, tips and tricks to make things a bit smoother if you do choose to go through the process. As I just mentioned, we'll connect you with people from government, industry, and academia who have clearances. And then again, answers to your questions. We do archive these sessions, but clearly if you have questions, you need to be here live to be able to ask those questions. If you are familiar with Zoom, there is a Q&A box down at the bottom of your screen. If you just click on that, type your questions into the Q&A box, and hopefully at an appropriate time, we'll be able to answer them. Today, it's just me, so I will do my best to answer them. But when we have guests, really, really encourage you to ask them questions. So with that, let's take a look at why you might want to get a clearance. One thing to really understand, and we will repeat this over and over and over again, it's for government or government-related jobs. Clearances are tied to functions inside the government or with contractors who are servicing the government. There are the obvious places, like I have an image there, top left, the Pentagon. Going clockwise, the executive office building, working in the White House quite often requires a clearance. Working for the NSA is one of those places that people are like, well, that's obvious, or the CIA, or the NGA. These are all kind of like, yeah, I get it. That makes sense that those are where you might need a clearance. But there's also outside of government. So these are contracting jobs. So uh, working on GPS, so Lockheed Martin, many technologies dealing with satellite technologies are classified. And we'll get into what classification really means. And in a later module, we'll go into it in depth. Uh, we wouldn't be surprised that there are parts of cybersecurity that would require a clearance. Uh, DoD missions, the that cool F-35. There's a lot of classified tech around that. Just as space has, you know, the vast, a huge part of space is classified. Not surprisingly, a huge part of nuclear is classified. And that's an image of a civilian nuclear power plant. And yes, I remember at my university, one of my roommates worked in the research reactor. That was his work study, and he needed a clearance. The jobs in that sector tend to need clearances, as you would expect, for launch, because again, it deals with space. Uh, Again, these jobs, you are not a government employee, but with possible exception of nuclear, you're pretty much working on contracts for the government. I I would offer, this is kind of on pause, but it's only on pause for a little bit. There are a lot of cleared jobs. I did look last night. The number's down a little bit. This is from last year, 64,000 jobs. True, there's a hiring freeze. That means there are only 61,000 jobs being listed right now. That's still tens of thousands of openings, lots and lots of opportunities. Uh, I actually will put up, let me see, can I have a poll? Let's have a look here. Um, Definitely should have done that. Anyone want to type into the Q&A chat what a starting salary would be for someone doing cybersecurity as a technician? So we're not talking about a PhD. We're talking about someone probably with an associate's degree working overseas. So uh, clearly you can see that job in the intelligence community, but quite a lot of those jobs are with the State Department. Does anyone have any guesses? We have one guess saying around 65, 60, 70. Uh, I'm glad that that's great. That also means people have kind of done their homework. That is about a GS 9, which would be where you would start with a bachelor's degree, a little bit of experience. There's a little bit of a bump for cyber, but you get a huge bump. Overseas, it could easily be six figures. Of course, it means you're living overseas, which has a lot of complications. Although I can say I did that, and uh, uh, it was a worthwhile experience living and understanding another culture. Um, so that also proves to me that you have figured out the Q&A box. So some common questions that we get, and obviously if you get questions, feel free to type them in the box. Uh, the common things are, what does it take to be clearance ready? And to be very clear, at the end of this program, you will not have a clearance. To get a clearance, you need a job that requires the clearance. And this is one of the reasons we have this program, because you're probably thinking of it right away. Well, how do I get a job that requires a clearance without a clearance? Uh, and it's hard. Um, Once you have that first job and you get the clearance, then things get a lot easier. We're trying to bootstrap you, get you in the position that when you're in that interview for that job that requires a clearance, you can explain to them that you fully understand the process, you truly believe that you would get your clearance, and here's demonstrated proof that you've been exposed to the requirements. Uh, and again, this is more than one module. We'll go pretty deep into uh, what the requirements are, which does fall into, are you qualified? Will you be able to get that clearance? There are some things that are have you evers. So, for example, if you've been a member of a terrorist organization advocating for the violent overthrow of the United States government, you're not going to get a clearance. Uh, on the other hand, if you smoked marijuana 15 years ago and you didn't like it, and you kind of demonstrated over 15 years that you're not going to do it again, the fact that you had that in your past does not preclude you from getting a clearance. Except for a few, there are a few government agencies. For example, the Drug Enforcement Agency would probably still say no, but the State Department, for example, might say yes. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk in depth over a few modules about the process and what kind of you need to do to get that clearance. We'll also talk about the downsides of the clearance process. And there are some downsides, there are some constraints on having a clearance, including the fact that you would sign a non-disclosure agreement is basically the framework, but you're signing a contract with the United States government for life. It's not just for the time you have that cleared job. You have some restrictions and agreement that you voluntarily enter into for life. And if you're not willing to do that, then this path may not be the path for you. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to put them into the Q&A box. Now, where does this process come from? I like to say it's not made up, and that's actually kind of important because for a long time it actually was made up, and different agencies kind of had different rules, different requirements. If you came from the right kind of family, from the right kind of university, you could get a clearance. And if you came from the wrong kind of family or the wrong college, you just couldn't get one depending on the agency. There are a number of laws and executive orders and presidential directives which have become regulations to harmonize the rules. And the goal is that everyone is treated the same. It doesn't matter, for this audience here, it doesn't matter if you are going to University of Virginia or the smallest community college in the corner of the state. You're all going to be treated the same. The rules are clear and uniform. There's no arbitrary, well, I like you and I don't like you, so you get a clearance and you don't. Everyone is clear and uniform, and protected status cannot be used against you. If you're a woman, if you're older, that can't be used against you. It also cuts across agencies. We did have this problem where you would get a clearance, say, with the Navy, and then an opportunity opened up in the Department of Commerce. and you'd have to go through the process all over again. So starting in 2008, clearances became, and I would say somewhat portable. They're not totally portable because some agencies have higher requirements than the baseline. And again, we're going to really dive into what is secret, what is top secret, what is Q, what is L. Uh, but for the most part, they're portable. And as you're traversing maybe from the say military to Department of Energy, there's somewhat a correspondence between the classification levels, and so the process is supposed to be streamlined. So first level of clearances, and this is actually for pretty much any federal job, uh, is that the person is capable of having the public trust. Uh, this is an excerpt of the executive order setting up public trust, noting that, why are we doing this? It's in the interest of national security. A kind of reminder, federal employment is a privilege, not a right. And so part of that privilege is that incumbents are reliable, trustworthy, of good conduct and character, and of complete and unswerving loyalty to the United States. Uh, and this, results in the requirement for a public trust investigation. For those of you who follow buzzword bingo, that's the SF-84. It's kind of a short form clearance form. Now, when you pass that public trust investigation, which pretty much is, do you have an arrest record? Do you have judgments against you? Things like that. Have you gone bankrupt? That doesn't mean you have a clearance, but that is kind of like a baseline. There was a court case in 1955 that eliminated the requirement for all federal positions to require a public trust investigation. But my guess is if you're on this call through the cyber initiative, the Commonwealth Cyber Initiative, it's most likely that most everyone here would at least need to be able to do the public trust background check. So now let's look at the baseline. Are you eligible? The first question is, are you a US citizen? A very common question is, I was born in Bolivia, or I was born in South Africa, or I was born in Turkey, uh, and I'm a naturalized citizen. Am I eligible for a clearance? The answer is yes. My parents emigrated, and I was born here. I'm a US citizen. Are you eligible? And the answer is yes. Uh, that doesn't mean the dual citizens, because if you're a dual citizen, you are a citizen of the US and you're a citizen of someplace else. Uh, you may be eligible. It depends, and you'll hear me say this for the rest of the year. Facts and circumstances. It will depend on the facts and circumstances, and of course, the job that you're being considered for, whether you would be eligible as a dual citizen. Um, for the most part, if you have that dual citizen through no fault or no action of your own, two countries that are kind of famous for this are Turkey and Israel. Those countries consider anyone of Turkish or Jewish descent who are in the country for a certain period of time are considered citizens and therefore can be conscripted and things like that. Um, there, it probably won't be held against you unless, of course, you actually fight in the army of one of those countries. But if you actively seeked out a dual citizenship, that probably will not be considered well, because remember that phrase, and this is again just the public trust, unswerving loyalty to the United States. Well, if you go out and actively get another citizenship, that kind of brings in the unswerving loyalty part into question. But again, that doesn't mean it won't happen, but depend on your facts and circumstances. The other one is I I do know of an individual who was not a U.S. citizen who got kind of a temporary clearance, but it's really improbable. That was a very, very special case. They had very, very special knowledge, and they'd lived in the U.S. for 35 years. So that's the first part. Are you a U.S. citizen? Assuming you are, uh, then the next one are kind of things that you often think about with a clearance. Are you reliable, trustworthy, of good conduct and character? So the things that are going to get looked at in your background are criminal records. And again, all of these things are facts and circumstances. That next bullet, not disqualifying on their own. If you were arrested for shoplifting when you were 16, and that was 5 years ago, and you've been totally clean since then, you still might be eligible. On the other hand, if you've committed bank fraud yesterday, uh, you're probably not going to get a clearance. Illegal drug use. I used a drug once when I was in college, didn't like it, is going to be treated very differently than, yeah, I got high with my uh, dealer buds from the criminal gang last weekend. Gambling addiction. Things like gambling addiction and financial irregularities, the concern is, will you be able to be bought off? Or will you be able, will you be subject to being coerced? Can someone see that, oh, you've got gambling addiction? Well, we can take care of that for you, but you need to do some favors for us. And by the way, this is uh, an example of question, because this question came up about 5 minutes ago, and here is the perfect time to answer it. The question was that this individual uh, had not been bankrupt, because again, bankruptcy is kind of a flag, but again, it's not disqualifying on its own. Uh, but the pandemic hit, they got divorced, really hit their credit. They defaulted on a credit card. Uh, can they get a clearance? Well, let me give you the rest of what this person typed in. They defaulted, but they've since paid all their debts in full. They have no outstanding debt except for student loans, which is what people would expect to be a long-term debt. So does that mean they won't get a clearance? And the answer is that is not going to be disqualifying on its own, especially if that's like 3 years ago or so, and you've kept up with payments and all that. You've got a good chance of getting the clearance. If you went bankrupt last year, if this is you're on your third bankruptcy, uh, you might get a bit closer scrutiny. Uh, Another question that came in, how do they know that you've got a gambling addiction or a history of drug use? I mean, things like criminal records, it's a record, and they do check. Financial irregularities, they do check. Um, Public support for violent overthrow, if you've got on your public Facebook page wanting to take down the government, that's pretty easy to find out. But what about things like drug use or gambling addiction? Uh, Thing number one, they will ask you, uh, and when they ask you, you're doing it effectively under oath. So if you lie, you could be prosecuted with a felony, and people actually have been prosecuted. So the first bar is you speak up. And if it's kind of like a situation like the bankruptcy, yes, you had a history of drug use. You voluntarily checked in for residential treatment, and it's been years and you're over it. Believe it or not, in some agencies, that might be seen better. I can relate a story I had when I was in high school. The nuclear Navy came recruiting, and someone asked the question of, what about marijuana use? And the recruiter said that in those days it was Admiral Rickover, and he said the admiral would much rather have someone who tried marijuana once and didn't like it than have someone who never tried it at all. Because the person who's tried it once and didn't like it, they're pretty confident they're not going to go back to it. Whereas the person who's never used it might try it and like it. Do not take that as advocating for, all right, we'll go try everything and so you can say you don't like it. Much, much better to have a clean record. But again, that's not disqualifying in itself. Then the next bit is, well, how do they know? Let's say you do lie. Depending on the level of clearance, they're going to talk to your coworkers, your neighbors, and depending on the position you're looking for and the level of clearance, they're going to talk to their friends. They're going to come up with people to talk to. So it's not just the people you tell them to talk to. And especially a thing with drug use, a very typical uh, technique is, you've answered truthfully, yep, I used to smoke marijuana. Uh, and they'll actually say, well, who should we talk to? And you'll give them a couple of names. They'll talk to them and they'll ask them for a couple of names. And what they're looking for is, who didn't you tell them to talk to? Uh, much, much better. So two pieces of advice. Much, much infinitely better to disclose if you have had a gambling problem, you've had a drug problem. And again, there's also this, you've not had a drug problem, but you have a drug problem. You still get tempted, then I would offer, seriously consider whether you want to have a clearance in a job that requires a clearance. And again, the idea is not, oh, you've done drugs, or oh, you've gambled, uh, you're disqualified. We're looking for indicators of unreliability, indicators that you might not be trustworthy, uh, indicators that you're likely to do something wrong. Because, the concern is, if you ignore the drug laws, will you ignore the security laws? And on the one hand, maybe you do have an ethics framework that says, yeah, well, I'll ignore this law, but I would never ignore that law. But think of it from the perspective of the United States government. If you're willing to violate one law, would you be willing to violate another? Uh, Actually, I will touch upon this question, but we have a whole module on drug use. But this last question is, what if you're not a regular smoker? Can you say no when you're asked? There are two parts of that. One is, if you reliably say no, you're not smoking. Great. Now, when you put in that adjective, I'm not a regular smoker, there are two bits. We'll go into this in much greater detail, but federal law is you cannot have a clearance if you smoked in the last year. And then Uh, uh, it depends on the agency. Again, the DEA, they basically can't, they've decided they can't afford to have anyone. The FBI is also somewhat like this. They can't afford to have anyone who ever uh, violated federal law. So it depends on the your circumstance, and it depends on what job you're going to. One person asked about like parking tickets and speeding tickets. Honestly, don't know. If you don't pay your parking tickets, that would definitely get you into trouble. But the questions usually are, have you violated major laws? So, for example, I went, not I, you've gone 60 in a 55 zone and you get a ticket, is usually classed differently than I was going 100 in a school zone. And the states tend to classify those violations differently. Uh, so, again, that will depend on, how bad it is. Uh, I also, I I think I understand the question here. The question is, I became a citizen last year. I'm going to presume I became a U.S. citizen last year. And the person was originally from Central America. Do they need to reject their citizenship? Well, first thing is, if you want a clear job, you want to contribute to the United States, you came here because you wanted to be part of the nation, obviously don't reject your United States citizenship. So then the real question is, what about your original citizenship? Uh, that would really be a question for your facilities security officer, and we'll talk more about that later in the course. Uh, Generally, when you become a U.S. citizen, you do reject your prior citizenships. Um, but again, this is the unswerving loyalty to the United States. Well, how loyal are you if you're not giving up your old citizenship? So that's a thing to consider. So why do we have secrets? And it's really to protect the United States. There are some pieces of information that have to be protected. And it's to protect our citizens, protect the institutions, national security, and also our interactions with foreign nations. And this comes again from, it's not made up, it's an executive order. Uh, but this poster is from the 30s. Again, this is a riff. Everyone pledges allegiance to the flag, but this is, and silence about the war. This was about, I think actually it might be from the teens. This is, I think, no, WPA would have been uh, World War II. That, to protect our country sometimes means keeping secrets. Um, Now, something that you might imagine is there are varying levels, uh, and varying from confidential. And I don't know if there are many people who play soccer. This is literally the same as the difference between a foul, a red card, yellow card, and a red card. Confidential is kind of like a foul. If this information is disclosed, it's reasonably expected to cause damage to national security. And it's somewhat uh, uh, damage because that gets compared to the yellow card, secret, where if you disclose this information, it's reasonable that it could be expected to cause serious damage to the national security. So just like in soccer and the laws of the game, we've got you do something bad, you do something kind of really bad, And then top secret is that, that disclosure would be expected to cause exceptionally grave damage to the national security. Kind of like money gets lost, uh, our negotiations with other countries are impacted, people die, right? Kind of the different levels. Now, unlike the laws of the game, if you do a foul, you're out, and you could be subject to criminal prosecution. So it's not like you release some confidential information and don't worry, it's okay. You have the same uh, obligation to not disclose, uh, but the uh, scrutiny of who has access to these classification levels clearly goes up and up and up. If you are getting just a collateral secret uh, clearance because your job is, yeah, there might be damage or serious damage, but you're never going to see information that could cause exceptionally grave damage, then we're not going to spend as much time looking at your background than someone who's going to have access to information that could cause exceptionally grave damage. People will die. This is where like you get the weapons of mass destruction and terrorism and things like that. If you're thinking, you've looked at the ads for jobs that require clearance, they might say, requires clearance. That typically means secret, or it might say, top secret or TSSCI. Uh, the SCI, sensitive compartmented information. Definitely going to spend a whole module on these different SCI, SAP, CUI. Uh, uh, these are basically saying, and this is a general rule, is we want to limit the access, especially if it's information that could cause exceptionally grave damage. So just because you have a top secret clearance does not necessarily mean you have access to particular information. You have to have a need to know that information, and you need to understand kind of what the grave damage is. So you would be what we call read in, and you would sign additional non-disclosure agreements around that uh, program because you need to be reminded. The person sitting next to you might also have a top secret clearance, but they don't have access to that compartmented information. It's in a compartment thing in a box. Uh, the Department of Energy, because it did come up in a different environment, instead of secret and top secret, they have L and Q clearances. If you remember the movie Oppenheimer, Oppenheimer was waiting to get his Q clearance. That would have been, roughly the equivalent of top secret. These classification levels are not made up. There is a classification guide that it was secret, not for disclosure, clearly outside the US government or to foreigners. It had been declassified, so you can go get it on the web from the .gov. We'll again talk about this again later, but little reminder, you can look for these documents on .gov websites. Do not get it from Wikipedia, or sorry, WikiLeaks. Um, if you access classified information that has been leaked, you're basically illegally accessing classified information, even if you have the classification clearances to see it. Um, Getting that information off of a .gov website, you know, pretty sure that, for example, this document has in fact been cleared for public release. So some principles, I've said it a few times, I'll say it again. The level of access determines the depth of investigation. If you're getting a public trust clearance, probably, they'll, look at your disclosure form, that SF-84, maybe make some spot checks. They will definitely check criminal records. They will definitely check financial records. They may or may not talk to your colleagues, as opposed to you're going for a TS-SCI investigation where they're going to talk to friends of friends. It's the SF-86, which is considerably longer than the SF-84. Uh, they're going to do a lot of investigation. Many of these clearances, they will actually do a polygraph test to really kind of ensure that they've got the information that you are truly trustworthy. So for the person who asked, I did drugs in the past, or there was a period of time where I wasn't able to pay all my bills. Circumstances change, things that, happened in the past that, if you were going for a clearance at the time would have disqualified you, they may not be disqualifying. Uh, Conversely, if you were an angel and you never did drugs, you paid your bills, you did all your volunteer work and all that, and you get your clearance, no problem. If you do something stupid today, you're going to lose your clearance. So the clearance process follows your facts and circumstances and your current behavior. Uh, Someone did ask actually a really good question. Do investigators look at what you did as a child? Uh, this is not me, it is a friend of mine who basically said, thank goodness I did the drugs when I was 17. Um, Generally, they will not look back before 18. Now, again, if you were in juvenile detention, that may come up. I'm not sure. Not sure if that would come up, but it may. But if you like did stuff, the forms actually are pretty explicit. Everything is typically from your 18th birthday, typically. Um, and many of the questions are, have you in the past 7 years? Have you in the past 10 years? And it also has that caveat, like if you're just graduating with an associate's degree, you're 19, 20 years old. The have you in the past 10 years is really have you in the past 2 years for a lot of those questions. Uh, do everyone a favor. I say don't lie ever on these forms. But if the question says, have you in the past 7 years and you had an incident 10 years ago, do everyone a favor, answer the question truthfully. No. Because if you answer yes, you then have to explain it. And then when the investigator realizes it was out of scope for the question, in a sense, that's going to bring up trustworthiness in a different way. It's saying you can't follow directions. And how can you be trusted if you can't follow directions? So that was actually a good question, which we will review because we are going to go through the SF-86 in depth. Let's see. I'll get to some of these other questions in a bit, but first, uh, again, some things about why you might not want a clearance. Uh, the process can be long. Again, depends on the level of clearance. A secret clearance can be done in months. Top secret can easily take a year. If you've traveled a lot overseas, if again, like you were naturalized citizen very recently, if you have a lot of contacts that need to be checked, it'll be a long process. Uh, it can be quite invasive. Again, how do they know that you use drugs? How do they know you've got gambling? We'll go into those details in our next section next month. Uh, and another reason you might not want a clearance is you're pretty confident you will not get the clearance. You are currently using illegal drugs. Uh, you are currently involved with criminal activity. And again, those are like kind of the two biggest ones. It's not an exhaustive list. The other thing about why you might not want a clearance goes back to that angel turns bad. The process never ends. It's not phew, past the finish line, got my clearance. I don't have to worry about this. I can go have a toke. No. There's a process called continuous evaluation. Um, you will be continuously scrutinized. Your credit reports will be continuously monitored, even if you have a lock on your report. So the process never ends. So, in a sense, if that's not for you, uh, uh, pass on it. Uh, So if you still want to apply, well, then hang out for the rest of the program. As I said, next month we're going to go look at that SF-86 question by question. We're going to talk about the various agency clearance rules and regulations. As promised, we will do a deep dive because this seems to be kind of the number one issue nowadays for people having issues getting their clearance. But again, I also want to put out there some misperceptions. Just because you have used illegal drugs does not mean you will never get a clearance necessarily. We'll talk about some of the cybersecurity authorities' laws and regulations. This is twofold. You are participating under the auspices of the Commonwealth Cyber Initiative. The hope is you would be interested in cyber-related jobs. So we really want you to have an understanding of sort of the legal framework that those jobs live in. But also, one of the questions on the SF-86 is, have you violated any IT policies? So all of you have some affiliation with a Virginia institution of higher education. You may not remember this, but when you got your email account, when you got your access to the network, you signed a piece of paper saying you understood kind of the rules of the road. You're not going to launch cyber attacks. You're not going to do phishing from your account. You're not, and depending if you're at a state institution, you're not going to run a business off of your like university laptop or whatever. So we'll talk about that, and then finally, probably the second most place that people get tripped up. We're going to talk a lot about social media. Facebook, TikTok, X, LinkedIn, Mastodon. We're going to talk about things to watch out for and to be mindful of. And then probably the most fun is instead of listening to me talk, you will listen to people who are hiring people with clearances from industry and the federal government. You'll be talking to people who've gone through the process, people who sometimes we are able to get someone who actually does the process. So you'll be able to get answers to questions more authoritatively than I can give. So I do have a few questions. We'll try to get through them in the last 10 minutes here. Two of them, actually, a number of them are kind of related. Uh, One is your spouse has a secret clearance already. They're in the military. They've got a secret clearance. Does that make it easier or harder for you to get a clearance. Facts and circumstances. Uh, if while your spouse is in the military in a trustworthy career and you're on the payroll of the KGB, you're not going to get a clearance. Um, that's, facts and circumstance. But there's another fact, and that is the SF-86 is long. And a lot of those questions are things like, where have you lived? Have you ever owned foreign property? Who do you keep contact with? Which foreigners do you have like close and continuing relations? And this may happen. You are an immigrant, you've got your citizenship, but you have family in your home country, or your spouse maybe has family in their home country. Not disqualifying. Uh, but that means you'll get more scrutiny. And if it's the same people that your spouse has had interviewed and all that, you have two benefits. One is it might make the process go faster. And the second is you have to list all of their demographic information. You don't have to go get it. You already have it. Uh, I also, there's another part of the question. It was just a statement, but I hope this person doesn't mind my saying it. That spouse emigrated to the US from an African country and joined the Navy 20 years ago and gave up their citizenship from that country. So they got their clearance, existence proof that immigrants can get their clearance. Another question is, well, hey, can you transfer a clearance? You've got that secret clearance from the Navy or whatever. Can you transfer it? The question is within DoD agencies, and that's usually the easiest. That pretty much just happens. Um, some parts of the intelligence community are very, very particular, and they may basically say, yeah, you've got your top secret, but we're going to do a little more investigation. Or maybe you have a top secret without a poly. It's their policy that everyone has a polygraph. So, you'll still have to do the polygraph. But again, you'll have all the information. Most likely will just transfer. Then there's kind of the other side of that is I want to get a clearance. What if I enlist? Will I get a clearance? Depends on the job. Not everyone in the military has a clearance. But that is a way of, how should we say, I wouldn't say fast tracking a clearance, but there's no question that that job might require a clearance. Truth in advertising, though, typically, especially if you're enlisting, let's say you enlist and you, for some reason, don't get the clearance. Well, you might not get the cool job. They can assign you anywhere. But presumably you'd be confident in getting your clearance. And that is not unusual that someone does military for 5, 10, or the full 20 years and then comes out, you're very much in demand. You've got that military experience and you have that clearance. Uh, let's see. One question, we're going to talk next month about interim clearances. So I'm going to hold that question. Someone had a question about interim clearances. What about local government? Clearances are federal. Full stop. However, there are cleared positions in local government. For example, if you are receiving in a position to receive classified information, you may need to have a clearance. And again, typically there are arrangements that, basically you have that federal need to know. But typically you don't need one to work in local government because that's local, not federal. And then another question, which again, we're going to talk about when we go through the SF-86. You're on a prescription medication, can you still get a clearance? The answer really is it depends. There are some disqualifying conditions, but some of them are disqualifying unless you're on medication. So then the real question is, and where you're going to get more scrutiny is, like, have you ever gone off of your medication when you weren't supposed to? And that quite often is a have you ever? Or are you in an environment where this is a possibility? Um, so I would not say, oh, it's no problem. But I also wouldn't say, oh, it's disqualifying. It really depends on your facts and circumstances. Uh, and last but not least, and actually I will call this, if you got another question, hold it for next week so we can end on time. This last one is, can or will there be a change in the process of obtaining a security clearance in the coming months due to the new administration? And the answer is, I can't answer that. Um, as you noticed, a lot of the processes and procedures are by executive order, and the president can issue executive orders. That's what the president does. So could it change? Of course it could change. Will it change? We have no idea. So I will be humble here and say I try to answer all of your questions, but that's one that in fact, no one really can answer except for the president, and even there, it's what he desires because he also has to conform to the existing laws and regulations. So with that, I will hand it back to Kendall for some end of session housekeeping. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you all for joining us today for the first module. As I mentioned, the next one will be March 12th from 1 to 2. You will be getting a calendar hold from me and reminders. And with that said, we are all set for today. Thank you again for joining us.